I still remember the sound of the safe clicking open and the hollow silence that followed. Every piece of jewelry my life was wrapped around was gone, and when I asked where it was, my daughter-in-law looked at me calmly and said she had given it away because I did not need it anymore. In that moment, I realized something far more terrifying than theft was happening. I was not being helped. I was being erased. My memories, my authority, my place in my own home were slipping away, and the people I trusted most were watching it happen. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how these stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we are truly grateful to have you here. If you have not already, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with emotion, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, get comfortable, maybe grab your favorite drink, and let's begin this journey together. My name is Evelyn Parker, and I am 71 years old. I live alone now, in a cedarwood house by a quiet lake in a small town in Vermont, a place where mornings arrive gently and evenings settle in without urgency. People often assume that a woman my age living alone must be fragile or lost. The truth is quieter than that. I am not weak. I am simply a woman who has learned how to endure. This house was built by my husband and me more than 4 decades ago. He was a skilled carpenter, the kind who believed that if something was worth building, it was worth building well. Every beam, every window frame, every shelf still carries the mark of his hands. When he died suddenly from a stroke, the house did not change, but the sound inside it did. Silence moved in, slow and permanent. It sat with me at the kitchen table, followed me down the hallway, and waited for me in bed each night. I did not fall apart after his death. I paid the bills, kept the garden alive, and learned how to sleep alone. Grief, for me, was not loud. It was an absence. It was reaching for a second coffee cup and stopping halfway. It was realizing that no one would ask me how my day had been. The days stretched long, especially in winter when the lake froze and the town seemed to hold its breath. I was never worried about money. My husband and I had planned carefully, saved steadily, and lived within our means. What I lacked was not security, but company. Loneliness does not announce itself. It settles quietly, convincing you that it is reasonable, manageable, even normal. Until one day you realize you have started talking to the radio just to hear another voice. In my bedroom closet, behind a small locked safe, I kept my jewelry. Not because it was valuable in the way people imagine value, but because it was mine. The pieces belonged to my mother before me. A gold bracelet she wore every Sunday, a simple pearl necklace she gave me on my wedding day, earrings that had never left the family. I rarely wore them. I did not need to. Knowing they were there was enough. They were proof of continuity, a reminder that I came from something and belonged to something. My son Daniel was that reminder too. He was my only child, the center of my world when he was growing up. He had always been kind, thoughtful, and dependable. Even as an adult, he called regularly and visited when work allowed. When he married Melissa, I welcomed her with genuine hope. She was confident, articulate, and seemed to care deeply about building a stable life. I told myself I was lucky. Many women my age never truly connect with their daughters-in-law. I believed I had gained one. After my husband passed, Daniel worried about me. He did not say it outright, but I could hear it in his voice. Melissa was more direct. She spoke about companionship, about safety, about how difficult it must be for me to manage everything alone. When they suggested moving in with me for a while, I did not hesitate long. I told myself it would be temporary. I told myself it would be good for all of us. At the time, it felt like relief. The house filled with footsteps again. There was conversation at dinner, movement in the mornings, life returning to rooms that had grown still. I did not see it as the beginning of anything dangerous. I saw it as the end of a hard chapter. I truly believed the storm had already passed. If you are still watching and starting to sense that something feels off in this family dynamic, please comment number 1 below so I know you are with me. What happened next was subtle at first, but it changed everything. Now let us move on to chapter 2. When Daniel and Melissa first suggested moving in with me, it did not sound like a sacrifice on their part. They framed it as a solution, something practical and even generous. Daniel spoke about safety and convenience, about not wanting me to be alone in such a big house. Melissa spoke about companionship, about how difficult winters could be in Vermont for someone my age. I listened, nodded, and told myself that this was what families were supposed to do for one another. I did not say yes because I needed help. I said yes because I was tired of the silence. I was tired of eating dinner alone and waking up to mornings that felt too large for one person. I told myself that sharing space would bring warmth back into the house, that hearing other voices would soften the sharp edges of grief. I did not think of it as giving anything up. I thought of it as letting life back in. The first weeks felt almost comforting. The house filled with motion again. There were footsteps on the stairs, dishes in the sink, laughter drifting in from the living room. Melissa took charge of the kitchen without being asked. She reorganized cabinets, labeled jars, and replaced a few old items she said were no longer practical. I watched her move through the house with confidence, and part of me felt relieved that someone else was paying attention to details I had grown too tired to manage. She often reminded me that I should not worry so much anymore. "At your age," she would say gently, "you deserve to rest. You have done enough." The words were not cruel. In fact, they sounded kind. They suggested care, concern, and respect. I began to let her handle small things, grocery lists, scheduling appointments, minor household decisions. It seemed harmless, even thoughtful. Slowly, without any formal conversation, my routines began to shift. I adjusted my schedule to match theirs. I asked before making plans. I explained myself when I wanted to go out. No one told me I had to do these things. I did them instinctively, the way you do when you do not want to inconvenience anyone. I did not want to appear ungrateful. I did not want to be seen as difficult. Daniel noticed none of this, or pretended not to. He worked long hours and came home tired. When I hinted that something felt different, he brushed it off. He said I was imagining problems where there were none. He said Melissa was only trying to help. His silence filled the spaces where reassurance should have been. Without realizing it, he became a witness instead of a shield. There were moments when my instincts stirred. Small moments. A comment about how little I needed now. A suggestion that I should simplify my life. A reminder that letting go was healthy. Each time, I dismissed the unease. I told myself that they meant well, that I was lucky to have a family willing to step in, that many women my age were far more alone than I was. What I did not see then was how easily kindness can turn conditional, how care can quietly demand obedience. No one raised their voice. No one gave orders. The shift was subtle enough that I questioned myself instead of questioning them. I wondered if I was becoming stubborn with age, if I was resisting change out of habit rather than reason. I told myself that families make adjustments, that compromise is part of love, that it was better to bend a little than to risk breaking what little closeness I had left. Looking back now, I can see the moment when the balance tipped. At the time, it felt like nothing at all. By the end of that first month, The house no longer felt entirely mine. It still looked the same, but something underneath had changed. I had given more than I realized, and I had done it willingly. The door had not been forced open. I had held it wide myself, believing that what walked in was only kindness. If you are still watching and noticing how kindness can quietly turn into control, please comment number 2 below to let me know you are following closely. The next moment revealed the first real warning sign I could no longer ignore. Now, let us move on to chapter 3. The first thing I noticed changing was not the house or my routines. It was my relationship with money. I had always handled my own finances, paid my bills on time, and kept careful records. After Daniel and Melissa moved in, Melissa began offering to take care of small things. She said it would make my life easier. She said I had earned the right to stop worrying about details. At first, I welcomed the help. Letting go of a few tasks felt like relief. I did not see how quickly convenience could turn into dependence. Melissa started paying the utility bills, then the property taxes. She suggested combining household expenses so everything would be clearer. When I hesitated, she smiled and said I should trust her. I told myself that trust was the foundation of family. Gradually, I realized I was no longer reaching for my wallet the way I used to. When I mentioned buying something, Melissa often responded that it was unnecessary. The words were soft, almost thoughtful, but they carried weight. I began asking before spending money, even on things I had purchased freely for years. I did not know when that shift happened. I only knew that it had. Then small things started disappearing. At first, I assumed I had misplaced them. A chair my husband used to sit in by the window was gone one afternoon. A lamp from his workshop vanished without explanation. When I asked, Melissa said she had donated them. She explained that the house needed space, that holding on to too much clutter was unhealthy. I felt unsettled, but I swallowed the feeling. They were only objects, I told myself. A few days later, while scrolling aimlessly on my tablet, I recognized something that made my stomach tighten. The chair. It was there on a resale website, photographed in my living room, listed under Melissa's account. My hands shook as I scrolled through more listings. The lamp was there too, so were a few other items I had not even realized were missing yet. I closed the screen and sat very still. I did not confront her immediately. I needed to be sure of what I was seeing, sure of what it meant. Part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation that made sense. Another part of me knew that explanations rarely soften facts. That evening, I spoke to Daniel. I did not accuse. I described what I had found and how it made me feel. He listened, distracted, and said Melissa was probably just trying to help manage the house. He told me not to worry so much. His words landed heavier than he intended. For the first time, I felt truly unheard. After that conversation, I noticed how isolated I had become. Friends stopped dropping by unannounced. Melissa often mentioned that I should rest, that socializing was tiring for someone my age. I began declining invitations, unsure whether I was allowed to come and go as I pleased. The house felt quieter again, but this silence was different. It pressed in on me. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations, searching for moments when I should have spoken up. I questioned my own judgment. Was I being unreasonable? Was I clinging too tightly to control? Or was something being taken from me while I watched it happen? The answer came slowly, but it was clear. The first thing I had lost was not money or possessions. It was authority over my own life. Decisions were being made without me, for me, and sometimes against me. I was still standing in my own house, but I was no longer steering my days. Once that realization settled in, I understood something else just as clearly. If I did not reclaim control soon, everything else would follow. If you are still watching and feeling that unease growing, please comment number 3 below, so I know you are still here with me. What I discovered next was not just hurtful, it was proof that something far more serious was happening. Now, let us move on to chapter 4. I chose a quiet afternoon to speak to Melissa, one of those slow Vermont days when the lake lay still and the house felt suspended in time. Daniel was at work. I told myself that made it easier, that a private conversation would keep things calm. I did not rehearse accusations. I did not plan to confront. I only wanted to be heard. I told her that it unsettled me when things disappeared without my knowledge. I said that some of those items had belonged to my husband, that they were not clutter to me. I explained that I needed to be consulted before decisions were made about my home. My voice stayed even. I chose my words carefully, as if any sharp edge might shatter something fragile. Melissa listened with a practiced expression of concern. She nodded, folded her hands, and spoke softly about my well-being. She said holding on to the past could be unhealthy. She said simplifying my surroundings would help me find peace. She never denied selling the items. She reframed it as something necessary, something kind. By the end of her response, my feelings had been gently pushed aside, treated as obstacles rather than truths. What unsettled me most was not what she said, but what she did not say. There was no acknowledgement of my loss, no apology for acting without my consent. My discomfort was treated like a misunderstanding, not a boundary that had been crossed. I left that conversation feeling smaller than when I entered it, unsure whether I had spoken up or merely confirmed her authority. That evening, I tried again, this time with Daniel. I waited until we were alone, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. I did not mention the listings or the money. I told him how excluded I felt, how decisions were being made around me instead of with me. I asked him if he thought that was fair. He sighed and rubbed his temples, already tired. He told me I was reading too much into things. He said Melissa was only trying to make life easier for all of us. He said change was hard, especially at my age, and that I should try to be more flexible. His words were not cruel, but they were dismissive. They landed like a door closing. After that conversation, I began to withdraw. I stopped raising questions. I stopped offering opinions unless I was asked. I moved through my own home more quietly, careful not to disrupt the balance that now existed without me. It was not trust that kept me silent. It was exhaustion. At night, fear crept in where anger should have been. I wondered what would happen if I pushed too hard. Would they leave? Would the house return to its empty echoes? The thought of losing my son, even emotionally, frightened me more than losing furniture or control. Loneliness had already carved its space inside me. I was afraid of giving it more room. So I told myself that patience was strength, that endurance was wisdom. I convinced myself that yielding a little would keep the peace. I did not yet see that peace built on silence is fragile, and that every unspoken boundary becomes an invitation for the next one to be crossed. Still, something inside me resisted complete surrender. A quiet awareness followed me through the days, reminding me that what I was feeling was not imaginary, that discomfort was information. I carried that thought with me like a stone in my pocket, small but impossible to forget. By the end of that week, I understood that speaking up once was not enough. I also understood that I was not ready to speak louder. The danger was no longer invisible, but neither was my fear, and in the space between the two, I waited, uneasy, knowing that silence had already cost me more than I was willing to admit. If you are still watching and wondering whether silence can be more dangerous than conflict, please comment number 4 below to show you are still with me. What happened next was the moment everything shattered beyond repair. Now let us move on. It happened on an ordinary morning, the kind that does not announce itself. The lake was still, the light pale through the curtains, the house moving through its quiet routines. I went into my bedroom without urgency, thinking only of the day ahead. There was no sense of danger in me then, no instinct sounding an alarm. The safe was tucked behind my clothes, where it had always been. I knelt, turned the dial, and listened to the familiar clicks. That sound had always meant certainty. It meant that some things were still mine, untouched, unchanged. When the door opened, the air in the room seemed to shift. The safe was empty. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I leaned closer, as if the contents might be hidden in shadow, as if I had simply missed them. My chest tightened. My breath came short and shallow. I felt a strange weightlessness, as though the floor beneath me had softened. Time stretched thin, pulling the moment apart. I did not think about money. I thought about my mother fastening her necklace before church. I thought about the bracelet she slipped onto my wrist the day I married. I thought about years compressed into small, shining objects that no longer existed in that space. It felt like being erased. I was still there on the floor when Melissa's footsteps paused in the doorway. She did not rush forward. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply observed, as if she had been expecting this moment. I asked her where my jewelry was. My voice surprised me. It did not shake. She said they had been given away, donated. She said it as if she were reporting the weather. She told me I did not need those things anymore, that holding on served no purpose. The words landed with precision, practiced and final. Something inside me went quiet, not numb, not broken, quiet in a way I had never felt before. Fear loosened its grip, replaced by clarity. This was not misunderstanding. This was not misguided help. This was theft, stripped of its disguises. I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the dresser. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw no regret there, only confidence. She believed she had won something. That belief settled the last of my doubt. I told her she was right, that I did not need the jewelry anymore. The relief that crossed her face lasted only a second. Then I said that she was going to need a lawyer. The color drained from her expression. In that instant, the balance shifted. I walked past her and closed the bedroom door behind me. My hands were calm. My thoughts were clear. I understood then that every concession I had made had led to this moment. The silence, the patience, the fear of being alone had all paved the way, and now it was over. Downstairs, the house held its breath. I sat on the edge of the bed and allowed myself one long inhale. This was not the end of something precious. It was the end of pretending. Whatever came next would be difficult, but it would be honest. The line had been crossed. There would be no more quiet adjustments, no more hoping things would settle on their own. The storm I thought had passed was standing right in front of me, and for the first time since my husband died, I was ready to face it head on. After Melissa left the room, the house settled into a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited for my hands to shake, for tears to come, for panic to take over. None of that happened. What I felt instead was a strange clarity, as if a fog had lifted and left the shape of things unmistakably sharp. I replayed the months leading up to that morning, lining them up like pieces of a puzzle that finally fit. The offers of help that slowly became expectations, the gentle suggestions that turned into the decisions made without me, the money I stopped handling, the furniture that vanished. None of it had been accidental. It had been deliberate, layered carefully enough that I questioned myself instead of the people doing it. For a moment, I considered calling Daniel. I imagined his voice, the confusion, the way he would try to smooth things over. I knew how that conversation would end. He would ask for patience. He would ask me not to escalate. He would ask me to wait. Waiting had already cost me too much. I also thought about calling the police. The idea came and went just as quickly. I understood that acting out of shock would only give Melissa room to twist the narrative. She had been preparing for this longer than I realized. If I moved without thinking, I would be walking straight into her version of events. What I needed was distance from emotion and proximity to facts. I needed someone who did not love either of them, someone whose loyalty was not tangled in family ties. For the first time since my husband died, I accepted a difficult truth. Family was no longer a safe place to solve this. I thought of the number I had not dialed in years, a professional contact I had kept out of habit more than intention. My hand hovered over the phone longer than I expected. Making that call meant admitting that what was happening was real. It meant stepping out of denial and into action. When I finally pressed the screen, my voice was steady. The conversation was brief. I did not explain everything. I did not need to. I only said that I believed my finances were being abused and that I needed guidance. When the call ended, I felt something loosen inside my chest. I was no longer alone in this. From that moment on, I chose silence again, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of strategy. I did not confront Melissa. I did not mention the jewelry. I moved through the house as I always had, listening more than speaking, watching without reacting. Every instinct told me to stay alert. Fear did not disappear. It sat with me, quiet but present. The difference was that it no longer controlled my decisions. I began documenting small details, keeping mental notes of conversations, changes, patterns. I trusted my instincts now instead of dismissing them. That night, as I lay in bed, I understood that the choice I had made was irreversible. I was no longer hoping things would improve on their own. I was preparing for the consequences of standing my ground. Whatever came next would change my relationship with my son, my home, and the future I thought I understood. Still, there was relief in that realization. Choosing myself felt unfamiliar, but it also felt right. The battle had not begun yet, but I had taken my position. I had stopped waiting to be protected. I was ready to protect myself. If you are still watching and you feel the tension building, please comment number 6 below so I know you are still here. The next chapter is where the truth finally comes into the open and nothing can be hidden anymore. Now let us move on to chapter 7. I waited for the right moment, not because I was afraid, but because timing mattered. Once the truth came out, there would be no undoing it. I needed Daniel present, alert, and unable to escape into excuses. I needed Melissa unprepared. That combination did not come often, but when it did, I recognized it immediately. We sat in the living room on a quiet evening, the windows dark with early winter. The room looked exactly as it always had, yet it felt altered, as if the walls themselves were listening. Melissa leaned back on the couch, relaxed, confident in the control she believed she still had. Daniel sat across from her, distracted, scrolling on his phone. I felt a tightness in my chest, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to set in motion. I began calmly. I did not accuse. I did not raise my voice. I spoke about facts. I mentioned the missing furniture first, then the online listings, then the financial decisions that had been made without my consent. I watched Melissa's expression shift, just slightly, before she corrected herself and smiled. She said I was misunderstanding. She said everything had been done for my benefit. I continued. I spoke about patterns, not feelings. I explained how control had moved away from me piece by piece. The words felt heavy but steady as they left my mouth. Daniel looked up then, his attention finally caught. I could see confusion giving way to concern. Melissa denied everything at first. She laughed once, lightly, as if the conversation itself were unreasonable. But when I laid out specifics, dates, and actions, her confidence began to fray. Her answers grew shorter. Her tone sharpened. The calm mask slipped, revealing irritation beneath it. Daniel asked questions, slowly at first, then with urgency. He wanted clarity. He wanted reassurance. What he found instead was contradiction. The room felt smaller as the truth pressed in. I could see realization spreading across his face, followed closely by guilt. The turning point came when I mentioned a document Daniel had signed months earlier, something he barely remembered. His brow furrowed as he tried to recall it. Melissa grew still. Daniel stood and went to retrieve the file from the desk drawer where she had kept it. When he read it, his hands began to shake. It was a financial authorization, vague enough to seem harmless, serious enough to implicate him. He looked at Melissa, as if seeing her for the first time. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. I felt no satisfaction in that moment, only sadness. This was not victory. This was collapse. Melissa tried to regain control, speaking quickly, shifting blame, reframing intentions. But the balance had changed. She was reacting now, not directing. Daniel's voice broke when he asked how long this had been planned. She did not answer him. That was answer enough. I remained seated, grounded in the certainty that came from knowing I had done the right thing. I did not need to say more. The truth had done its work. Power had shifted not because I demanded it, but because it could no longer be hidden. When the conversation ended, no one spoke. Daniel sat with his head in his hands. Melissa stared at the floor. I stood slowly and left the room, aware that nothing between us would ever be the same again. The truth does not always bring relief. Sometimes it brings clarity sharp enough to cut. But once it is in the light, there is no returning to the dark. The house felt different after the truth came out. Not quieter exactly, but stripped of pretense. Every room seemed to hold the echo of what had been said, what could no longer be denied. I slept little that night, not because my mind raced, but because it stayed unnervingly still. By morning, I knew what had to happen next. I did not call a family meeting or ask for permission. I waited until Daniel and Melissa were both present. Then I spoke with a calm that surprised even me. I had no interest in reliving the arguments or reopening wounds. What mattered now was resolution. The facts were established. The question was how we would move forward. I laid out my terms clearly. There would be no more shared control of my finances. Access to my accounts would be revoked immediately. Anything that had been taken without my consent would be returned or its value accounted for in writing. Melissa would sign a formal agreement stating she had no claim to my property or assets. After that, she would move out of my home. I did not frame it as a threat. I did not raise my voice. I explained the alternative just as plainly. If these terms were refused, the matter would be handed over to professionals who specialized in elder financial abuse. The consequences of that path were not emotional. They were legal. The choice, I said, was hers. Daniel listened without interrupting. He looked older somehow, weighed down by the realization of what his inaction had allowed. When he finally spoke, it was to say that he supported me. There was no hesitation in his voice this time. That mattered more to me than any apology. Melissa tried to regain her footing. She asked for time, suggested compromises, implied misunderstandings. None of it landed. The ground had shifted and she could feel it. The confidence she once carried so easily was gone, replaced by calculation and fear. For the first time since she entered my life, she had nothing to leverage. Once the terms were accepted, I acted quickly. Passwords were changed, documents were secured, financial authority was returned to my name alone. These were practical steps, not dramatic ones, but each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Control, I learned, is often restored through quiet decisions rather than loud confrontations. Emotionally, the moment was not triumphant. I did not feel victorious or satisfied. I felt tired, deeply so, but underneath that fatigue was relief. Boundaries had been drawn. The constant tension that had lived in my chest for months began to ease. Daniel stayed. He offered help, not out of obligation, but out of responsibility. I accepted it carefully, with new rules and clear expectations. Trust, I understood now, had to be rebuilt deliberately. As for Melissa, her presence in the house diminished quickly. She moved through the rooms as if already a gazeist, gathering what belonged to her, avoiding eye contact. I watched without anger. The chapter she represented in my life was closing, and I had no desire to reread it. That evening, I stood alone in the living room and took a slow breath. Peace, I realized, is not the absence of a conflict. It is the presence of choice. I had chosen myself, my safety, and my dignity. Whatever uncertainty remained, it would be faced on my terms. If you are still watching and you want to see how this story truly ends, please comment number 8 below to let me know you are ready. The final chapters reveal what was lost, what was reclaimed, and the lesson that changed everything. Now let us move on to the conclusion. Melissa left on a gray morning without ceremony. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no final speech meant to wound. She packed quietly, moving through the house like someone already erased from it. I watched from the hallway as she carried her bags out, noticing how little space she actually occupied once her control was gone. When the door closed behind her, the sound felt final, clean. The house breathed differently after that. Not in a dramatic way, but in subtle shifts I noticed as I moved from room to room. The air felt lighter. The silence no longer pressed against my chest. For the first time in months, I did not feel watched in my own home. I could sit where I wanted months, leave things where I placed them, exist without explanation. A few days later, my jewelry was returned. It arrived in a small box, handled without reverence, but intact. I opened it slowly, touching each piece with care. I did not feel triumph. I felt recognition. These objects were not just adornments. They were witnesses to a life lived fully, reminders of who I had been before fear crept in. I placed them back in the safe, not as a proof of victory, but as symbols of boundaries restored. Daniel stayed. He moved through the house differently now, aware in a way he had not been before. We spoke more honestly, without the careful avoidance that once defined our conversations. He apologized, not repeatedly, but sincerely. He acknowledged his silence and the harm it caused. I did not demand penance. What I needed was accountability, and he gave me that. Our relationship shifted into something more balanced. I did not shrink myself to keep the peace. He did not assume authority where it was not his. We learned slowly how to be mother and son without control or dependency clouding the space between us. I began reconnecting with parts of my life I had set aside. I called friends I had not seen in months. I resumed small routines that grounded me. Morning walks, afternoon reading, quiet evenings that belonged to no one but me. These were not dramatic changes, but they mattered. Looking back, I saw clearly how loneliness had made me vulnerable, how my fear of emptiness had invited someone to fill it at any cost. I did not judge myself for that anymore. I understood it. Survival sometimes looks like compromise until you realize the price is too high. Justice did not arrive with sirens or courtroom speeches. It arrived in locks changed, documents secured, and choices reclaimed. There were no public consequences for Melissa beyond losing what she had tried to take. That was enough. I did not need punishment to feel whole again. One morning, I stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and noticed how ordinary everything looked. That ordinariness was the gift. Peace did not announce itself. It settled in quietly once I made room for it. What I took back was not just my home or my possessions. I took back my authority, my voice, and my sense of self. And that, I knew, was something no one would ever take from me again. Time did not rush forward after everything ended. It moved gently, as if allowing me to relearn how to live inside my own days. The house settled into a rhythm that felt honest. Mornings returned to me. I woke when I wanted, made my coffee slowly, and stood by the window watching the light change across the lake. There was no one measuring my choices anymore, no one reshaping my life while calling it care. I thought often about the woman I had been before all of this happened. She was not weak, as I once feared. She was lonely, and loneliness has a way of softening your boundaries until you mistake intrusion for affection. I do not judge her now. I understand her. She wanted connection. She wanted family. She wanted to believe that love would protect her without asking anything in return. What surprised me most was how much I changed without realizing it. I became quieter, smaller, careful not to take up space. I learned to doubt my instincts and explain myself unnecessarily. I mistook endurance for grace. Only after I stood my ground did I see how far I had drifted from myself. The jewelry sits in the safe again, but it no longer defines me. I still treasure it, but differently. It is memory, not value, proof of a life full of love, not a measure of my worth. I no longer need objects to remind me who I am. I carry that knowledge with me now, steady and unmovable. Sometimes I think about other women like me, women who have raised families, built homes, lived entire lives of responsibility, only to be told, quietly or directly, that they no longer know what is best for themselves. Women who stay silent because they are afraid of being alone, afraid of conflict, afraid of losing the last pieces of connection they have. I wish I could sit with each of them and say this plainly. Love does not require surrendering your dignity. Family, I have learned, is not defined by blood or proximity. It is defined by respect. Real family does not shrink you to make themselves comfortable. They do not take control of your life while insisting it is for your own good. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. I am not afraid of being alone anymore. Solitude, I discovered, is not the enemy. Losing yourself is. There is freedom in knowing that your choices are yours, that your voice matters, that your life belongs to you until your final breath. One morning, not long ago, I opened the safe and changed the combination, not because I feared theft, but because it felt right. Control, once reclaimed, deserves to be protected. I closed the door, stood up, and felt a quiet pride settle in my chest. What no one can take from me now is not my home, my possessions, or even my family. It is my sense of self, my ability to say no, my refusal to disappear for the comfort of others. That is the lesson this chapter of my life gave me, and it is one I will carry forward with gratitude. I turn off the lights at night, knowing that peace is not something given. It is something chosen, and I have chosen myself. In the end, what remains is not the pain, nor the conflict, but the quiet understanding that dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed. Life has a way of testing boundaries when vulnerability meets trust, and those moments reveal truths that comfort never could. Strength does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes as a calm decision to stop shrinking, to stop explaining, to stand still and say, "This is where I end and where I begin." True peace is not the absence of hardship, but the presence of self-respect. It is learning that love should never cost identity, that age does not diminish worth, and that it is never too late to choose oneself. Every ending carries a lesson, and this one reminds us that reclaiming our voice is the most powerful act of all. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more stories that speak to strength, resilience, and truth.